interconnect a region of over 600 cultural bridges between our lands.
Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching ASEAN in Focus on tonight's headlines. The tensions between China and Taiwan continue to escalate, with China issuing increasingly bellicose rhetoric. China's defense ministry has accused Taiwan's ruling Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, of pushing the island towards a dangerous situation of war at an accelerated pace. The accusation comes after reports that Taipei plans to buy thousands of military drones in the next 4 years. The situation in the South China Sea is also tense, with China continuing to assert its territorial claims in the disputed waters. U.S. President Joe Biden has warned China that the U.S. will defend the Philippines in the South China Sea if necessary, despite China saying the U.S. has no right to get involved. The warning comes after two collisions between Filipino and Chinese vessels in the disputed waters. 5 Myanmar nationals have filed a criminal complaint in the Philippines against 10 serving or former members of the Myanmar military, accusing them of war crimes against the Chin minority. The war crimes complaint filed against the Myanmar military is a significant development, as it could lead to criminal proceedings against those responsible for the atrocities committed against the Chin minority. The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas raised its key interest rates by 25 basis points to 6.5% in an effort to curb rising inflation. The interest rate hike is a sign that the Philippine economy is facing inflationary pressures. The BSP is hoping that the rate hike will help to bring inflation under control. Tonight on our news, China's defense ministry has accused Taiwan's ruling Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, of pushing the island towards a dangerous situation of war at an accelerated pace. The accusation comes after reports that Taipei plans to buy thousands of military drones in the next 4 years. Chinese Ministry of Defense spokesman Wu Qian said the Chinese armed forces would strengthen its military training and preparation for war.
关于无人机啊，这个民进党当局呢，置台湾同胞的福祉于不顾，肆意的挥霍纳税人的血汗钱，花费巨资高价购买武器为谋独壮胆，正在加速把台湾推向兵凶战危的境地。
Mr. Wu also hit out at the U.S. influence in the South China Sea, waters claimed by China.
那么在此呢，我们也正告民进党当局，以武拒统，死路一条。 以美谋独，必遭失败。中国人民解放军持续加强练兵备战，坚决捍卫国家主权和领土完整，坚决维护台海的和平稳定。一段时间以来，台海局势复杂严峻，其根源在于民进党当局挟洋自重，以美谋独，在于美方打台湾牌，妄图以台制华。无论是军援款也好， 预备金也罢，都是在拿着百姓的血汗钱来玩火，只会把台湾推向兵凶战危的境地。在捍卫国家主权和领土完整的问题上，中国人民解放军意志坚如磐石，能力日趋增强。
But he said the channels of communication have always been open between Beijing and Washington. Relations between the two sides have soured since President Tsai Ing-wen of DPP came to power in 2016. Beijing has, in recent years, ratcheted up diplomatic and military pressure on Taiwan, and the number of warplane flights around the island has spiked following last August's visit by Nancy Pelosi, then Speaker of the House of Representatives in the U.S. Also on that day, Taiwan's military says a Chinese flotilla led by the Shandong aircraft carrier has entered the Pacific Ocean via the Bashi Channel, a waterway that separates the island from the Philippines. The move comes amid heightened tensions between Taiwan and China, which considers the island its territory and has vowed to seize it one day. Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense says it's monitoring the situation and has tasked appropriate forces to respond. The ministry also says it detected 15 Chinese warplanes crossing the median line, bisecting the Taiwan Strait. The ministry said the aircraft had also carried out joint combat readiness patrols with Chinese military vessels. Taiwan's defense minister warned earlier this month that China had stepped up military intimidation on the island by flying on increased number of warplanes around it. The island detected a recent high of 103 Chinese warplanes in September, as well as 9 Navy ships. The ministry has decried China's military harassment, saying it could lead to a sharp escalation in tension and worsen regional security. The U.S. and Australia have condemned China's destabilizing actions in the South China Sea, including the disruption of routine Philippine maritime operations around Second Thomas Shoal. In a joint statement released today, U.S. President Joe Biden and Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese expressed their concern over China's militarization of the South China Sea and its dangerous use of Coast Guard vessels and maritime militia to intimidate and harass other countries in the region. U.S. President Joe Biden warned China that the U.S. will defend the Philippines in the South China Sea if necessary.
Look, Australia and the United States also share, in my view, a commitment to upholding international rules of the road, including freedom of navigation. Just this past week, the PRC vessels acted dangerously and unlawfully as our Philippine friends conducted a routine resupply mission within their own exclusive economic zone in the South China Sea. I want to be clear. I want to be very clear. The United States defense commitment to the Philippines is ironclad. The United States defense agreement to the Philippines is ironclad. Any attack on the Filipino aircraft vessels or armed forces will invoke our mutual defense treaty with the Philippines.
Despite China saying the U.S. has no right to get involved.
The U.S. is not a party concerned in the South China Sea issue and is not in the position of interfering in the issues between China and the Philippines. The U.S. defense commitment to the Philippines should not undermine China's sovereignty and maritime rights and interests in the South China Sea, nor should it use the commitment to embolden the Philippines' illegal claims.
The warning comes after 2 collisions between Filipino and Chinese vessels in the disputed waters. The Philippines is an important strategic ally of the U.S. as it borders 2 potential flashpoints in the Pacific, the South China Sea and Taiwan. The U.S. and the Philippines are bound by a defense treaty that requires them to defend each other in the event of an armed attack. The Filipino boats were on their way to a warship that Manila has marooned at a shoal to reinforce its claims. The Philippines Defense Minister said the Chinese boats intentionally hit the Philippine vessels and accused China of lying about what had happened.
In law, we have a principle called the thing speaks for itself. Was that restraint? I don't think so. Any unbiased person with a modicum of reason will see that this is not restraint. And there was another attempt to distort the narrative by saying there was a supposed promise. That has been put to rest already, that there is no promise, and if ever there was such was, if ever, which we do not accept, rescinded. We cannot compromise within our 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone within the bounds of our Constitution. Our Constitution is clear about our territorial integrity and sovereignty, of which there can admit of no compromise, particularly in the face of the arbitral award. So their preface to their statements, and their statements are to us a distortion of the truth.
The Philippines is planning to develop joint seaports in the West Philippine Sea that can be used by Filipino fishermen, Philippine Coast Guard vessels, and for processing fish caught by Filipino fishers. Defense Secretary Gilbert Eudoro Jr. said that the joint seaports are part of the Philippine strategic basing plans.
Tapos doon sa strategic basing na gagawin natin sa mga darating na panahon, ito ay joint seaports na gagawin hindi lang po military use, kung hindi Coast Guard use, at pwede pong safe haven at daungan ng mga fishermen at processors po ng fish para sa drying at canning or other products po.
Eudoro also said that he's considering using naval vessels to help resupply Philippine detachments in the West Philippine Sea, but could not provide more details at this time. Aggressive Chinese actions during a resupply mission on October 22 led to 2 Filipino vessels being hit and damaged. 5 Myanmar nationals have filed a criminal complaint in the Philippines against 10 serving or former members of the Myanmar military, accusing them of war crimes against the mainly Chin minority. The complaint was filed at the Department of Justice in Manila on Wednesday. The lawyers representing the Myanmar nationals say this is the first time that such a case has been brought before the Philippines.
This is a case for war crimes. So we are actually bringing war crimes. This is a landmark suit because this is the very first time that such a case is being brought before the Philippines, and this is under Philippine law. It's called the International Humanitarian Law Act of 2010. So that law allows universal jurisdiction.
They really went here specifically in the Philippines so that they want to find justice here in the Philippines in the belief that we have a robust mechanism for protection of international humanitarian law.
Myanmar and the Philippines are both members of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN. ASEAN's efforts to defuse the Myanmar crisis have been fruitless so far.
Burma has been forgotten by the rest of the international community, and also people in our neighboring countries tend to not see what's truly happening in Burma. So we are really hoping that with the solidarity and support from the Filipino people and people in the ASEAN region, that we will be able to get some form of justice for the atrocities that our people suffered. The Chin people, however, our suffering has not been paid much attention to by the rest of the international community. And with this case, we're hoping that some light will be shone on the plight of our people, and that the Philippine government will consider our plea for justice here.
The complaint alleges that the 10 accused, including Chin Chief Minister Vong Swang Tang, were responsible for killing a pastor and 2 church elders in Tantlang Town, Chin, in September 2021. It also accuses them of directing attacks on churches and burning hundreds of houses in the same town between August 2021 and June 2022. The complaint also alleges that the accused blocked relief supplies reaching people in Chin State in the aftermath of Cyclone Mocha in May. In tonight's other news and beyond the region, Hurricane Autis, one of the most rapidly intensifying tropical cyclones on record, crashed into Acapulco, Mexico, with furious winds of 165 miles per hour, killing at least 27 people and shattering windows, uprooting trees, and largely cutting off communications and road links with the region.
Nadie está viniendo a ayudarnos, nadie sabe qué está pasando, no sé si el mundo sabe de Acapulco, si estamos vivos o qué pasó con Acapulco.
The storm partially destroyed many buildings, leaving gaping holes in the walls of high-rise towers. President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador arrived in the scene after his convoy found roads blocked by landslides and other debris, forcing officials to walk part of the way. Autis rapidly intensified within hours, from a tropical storm to the most powerful category of the 5-step Saffir-Simpson scale before hitting land, taking authorities by surprise. The World Meteorological Organization described the hurricane as, quote, one of the most rapidly intensifying tropical cyclones on record. People recounted a terrifying ordeal as Autis made landfall overnight, Tuesday, Wednesday.
pues es un caos total, es indescriptible, no tengo palabras para expresar lo que veo, nunca en mi vida había visto algo así. Acapulco está destrozado, vías, agua, luz, si ves la playa, es un basurero.
The World Health Organization spokesperson Tarek Jasarevich said that without fuel, the babies in incubators who need that life support will simply die, reiterating safe and sustained access is needed or there will be more suffering and more deaths in Gaza.
We need safe and sustained access. When we say safe access, we need security guarantees that our material and our workers will not be attacked during the transport and distribution of these supplies. So far, we have not been given any guarantees for north of Gaza. And what we really plead for is for those who are involved in this conflict to provide those guarantees to us that also hospitals in north of Gaza can receive necessary supplies.
The spokesperson also said without fuel, people who are on dialysis for renal problems will basically lose any chances to survive.
Fuel is needed for two things. Fuel is needed to have electricity in hospitals. You cannot have any hospital running without electricity and having a light. You need a light to treat patients. You need electricity for surgical theaters. You need electricity for incubators, for dialysis machines. So we need fuel. Fuel is also needed to desalinate the water, so hospitals have a clean water. If there is no fuel, then babies in incubators who need that life support will simply die, and many more people will suffer. People who are on dialysis for renal problems will basically lose any chances to survive in a longer term. So we need those things. If we don't get it, there will be more suffering and more death.
EU leaders have demanded humanitarian corridors and pauses in Israel's war against Hamas, urging aid access for civilians trapped in besieged Gaza, where the UN says nowhere is safe.
Leaders emphasized that the siege must stop and that it is of utmost importance that the Palestinian people and the hostages and all those who are in Gaza have access to humanitarian aid. There is no contradiction between showing solidarity to Israel and, of course, acting on the need of humanitarian aid for the people of Gaza.
Israel defends its operations with staunch backing from allies, including Washington, and has demanded Hamas release 224 foreign and Israeli hostages it seized on October 7. The fate of the hostages remains a complicating factor for Israel's planned ground operation. Hamas's armed wing said that almost 50 Israeli hostages had been killed in Israeli bombing raids, a claim that AFP could not verify. 4 hostages have already been released, but for the relatives of those left behind, the anguish continues. Meanwhile, Israeli troops entered northern Gaza on Wednesday for a targeted raid that came in preparation for the next stages of combat, according to the military. Israel faces growing calls to ensure its response does not cause increasing civilian casualties.
Hamas is hiding behind Palestinian civilians, and is despicable and, not surprisingly, cowardly as well. This also puts an added burden on Israel while they go after Hamas. But that does not lessen the need to operate in line with the laws of war. For Israel has to do everything in its power. Israel has to do everything in its power. As difficult it is to protect innocent civilians. And it's difficult.
An expansion of fighting on the ground also risks a wider regional conflagration, with Iran's foreign minister warning U.S. officials and military. American and allied forces in Iraq and Syria have been attacked at least 16 times this month, according to the Pentagon, which blamed Iranian-backed groups.
But between October 17th and the 24th, U.S. and coalition forces have been attacked at least 10 separate times in Iraq and 3 separate times in Syria via a mix of one-way attack drones and rockets. So again, we know that the groups conducting these attacks are supported by the IRGC, and the Iranian regime. What we are seeing is the prospect for more significant escalation against U.S. forces and personnel across the region in the very near term, coming from Iranian proxy forces and ultimately from Iran.
And the U.S. military struck 2 facilities in eastern Syria used by Iranian forces and affiliated groups, according to Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, stressing they were separate and distinct from the Israel-Hamas conflict. President Biden also sent a rare direct message to Iran's supreme leader, warning against further escalations.
We have had troops in the region since 9/11 to go after ISIS and prevent its reemergence in the region, having nothing to do with Israel at all. My warning to the Ayatollah was that if they continue to move against those troops, we will respond, and he should be prepared. It has nothing to do with Israel.
Leading Vietnamese environmental activist Wang Thi Mon Hong has been jailed for tax evasion, the latest in a series of crackdowns on activists by the country's communist government. Hong had been a vocal critic of Vietnam's environmental policies, and her conviction comes just a week after another leading environmentalist, Ngo Thi Nguyen, was arrested on charges of appropriating documents from a state-owned power firm.
So what I think we're seeing is a concerted effort simply to cut off the public space and to declare that all matters of public concern are to be addressed by the party and its state alone, and that there will be no toleration for dissident voices. And I think,
The crackdowns on environmental activists have raised concerns that Vietnam is trying to silence critics of its energy policies, even as it pledges to transition to clean energy. In 2022, a group of donors, including the U.S. and EU, pledged to mobilize $15.5 billion in funding as part of a Just Energy Transition Partnership, or JETP, to help Vietnam switch to clean energy faster. However, some experts have warned that the JETP could be used to whitewash Vietnam's human rights abuses and environmental record.
Activism of this sort, calling into question various kinds of practices regarding the environment, can be seen as a threat to powerful economic interests. And as we know, economic interests in Vietnam are always closely affiliated in some way with state power. And so
The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, or BSP, raised its key interest rates by 25 basis points to 6.5% in an effort to curb rising inflation.
The Monetary Board recognized the need for this urgent monetary action to prevent supply-side price pressures from inducing additional second-round effects and from further dislodging inflation expectations. The latest baseline projections point to an elevated inflation path over the policy horizon as upside risks continue to manifest. Before today's monetary policy action, the staff risk-adjusted forecast for 2024 was 4.7% from 4.3% previously. This is well above the government's target range. At the same time, second-round effects have broadened, including transportation fare increases and minimum wage adjustments. Inflation expectations have risen sharply, highlighting the risk of further second-round effects. The balance of risks to the inflation outlook still leans significantly toward the upside, due mainly to the potential impact of higher transport charges, electricity rates, international oil prices, and minimum wage adjustments in areas outside the National Capital Region.
As my usual habit, I'd like to end the week on a positive note. Let's encourage and build each other up so that no one is left behind. And that's it for tonight's broadcast. I'm Alma Angeles saying the news because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.